decision, there's likely to be a oh, okay. All right, the meeting's being recorded, that's fine. So I don't think it's a simple, I think it's a thorny, complicated issue, but not an impossible one. So some more ideas about suffering. We are not to seek suffering. As a Christian, there are some Christians that think they are to seek suffering and that there's something inherently to be desired by going through something tough. But I don't think we're supposed to seek suffering. Suffering just comes our way in the course of life. The second thought about suffering is that when we're young, most all of us have a profound and usually unspoken childhood longing that when we grow up, we're going to create a life where we don't suffer. And so out of that, we devise a program for happiness or a dream or a plan or ideas of when I grow up, I'm going to have this kind of house or this kind of family or this kind of education or this kind of job or this kind of money or this kind of pet or this kind of friends, whatever it is, we create a dream of a life that we're going to have that we think will keep us from suffering. And some of the good things that we long for, we do create, and they are blessings and they are joyful. But no matter how creative and talented and educated or anything we are, we're still going to suffer as we are going through life. And it breaks the childhood dream, the longing to not suffer. When suffering comes, it breaks the childhood dream and it shatters it. But we learn to accept that suffering is woven into life. God is doing all kinds of things in suffering. We know that we become more compassionate when we go through suffering. We know our ability to serve other people is enriched because we've been through hard things. We know that suffering turns us toward God, and we know that suffering transforms us. So Richard Rohr, the Catholic priest and teacher, says the most transformation that you can get out of your whole life comes from great love or great suffering. My aunt, Carol Smaley, the founder of Youth Home, used to say that the Reverend Jim Argue, who was the fantastic, fabulous preacher at Pulaski Heights Methodist Church for many years, he had a lot of suffering in his life. She used to say, the more Jim suffered, the stronger his sermons were. So we can see a lot of the benefits and blessings in suffering. And I think it's important to be able to see those blessings. And at the same time, there is a mystery to suffering that is beyond our.
Susan, you've frozen again on your connection.
All that. Why has God created a planet? And I think we have to live with an uncertainty that our understanding is never going to be fully enough to explain everything. So what helps us when we're suffering? 2 months ago, when I was talking about silence and resentment, the first thing that I said that helps, and it's the same thing with suffering, is to accept the facts of what are going on. When you are suffering or you're seeing the world suffering, step one is radical acceptance of what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what the reality is. So step one is acceptance. Step two, for me, I'm not a yogi in a cave in the Himalayas, and most of us are not. I believe there's some spiritual people that are far enough along that they do not need other people to help them through suffering. They do it straight with the pipeline to God. But for me, I really need people if I'm suffering. So, one, accept all of our feelings and accept the facts. Two, make sure that I'm supported by humans that I trust and that love me. And three, silence. And today we're going to talk more about what can silence do to help us or help others during a time of suffering. The first thing that silence can do is suffering is worsened by anxiety. Suffering by itself is bad enough. But what happens is, as we are going through suffering, we ball into that a profound and intense and a terrific anxiety. And when you wrap anxiety into whatever the suffering is, you get a complicated, yucky mess that is unnecessarily worse. So we're going to talk about how silence can help with the anxiety and suffering. Then we're going to talk about how silence can help us be present in the moment for that acceptance of everything that we feel. And then finally, we're going to talk about that it is through silence that we can listen for guidance. When there's suffering going on, we are often thinking, what can I do? What am I supposed to do? What should I do? And sometimes there are specific actions for us to do. And sometimes there's no action needed in the moment. It is simply a pain management strategy of ours to think up an action and take an action, do something. So it's out of the silence and the listening for God's guidance. Out of that silence comes a listening and an asking of the divine, are there actions that you want me to take? So I'll tell you a story. I've had two every week. I hike, my knees are good. So I'm really glad I did it. But it's incredibly painful, but it ends. So in the second knee replacement, I thought I had all my ducks in a row. That means I had my support team lined up of who was going to take care of me and support me as I went through the rehab, especially the first 2 or 3 weeks, really the first month. But what really happened is my small plan of my husband is going to take care of me. He's taken off work, and another family member didn't work. My husband's back went out. I mean, totally out, 100% out. So, and the other family member also became ill. So I've had my knee cut off basically, and I'm in a lot of pain, and I need a lot of support. I need a lot of help. And it's not going to happen at my house. That's just not going to happen. And first I was mad, which is ridiculous. Why be mad when people are sick? But that little part that says, I'm so nice to everybody and I take care of everybody and this is my turn to be sick and everybody's gone wonko on me, blah, blah, blah. So it's in the quiet that we accept what is. In the prayer, in the silence, in the meditation, my job was to accept my husband's back is out. There is not a thing this sweet man can do for me, nothing. My other relative is also ill. That is not anybody's fault. But in the beginning, there was non-acceptance on my part. So the suffering of the knee, I was adding on the suffering of my anger, resentment, my lack of acceptance. And in the silence, and in the prayer, and in the silence, and in the silence, and in the silence, there was acceptance, acceptance, acceptance. Also in the silence, I noticed that I was really anxious about how am I going to get through this, because I'd been through it once before and it's quite a project. And in the silence, I kept in the silence until the anxiety could go down and could go down and could go down. And somewhere in the silence, I listened. And guess what I heard? I heard that I was going to ask Sophia Said if I could move into her house and if she would be family for me. And that is exactly what I did. I left my house. I told my husband and my other relative, bye, Rick, go to the doctor, call the caregivers, get some help. I am like out of here. And I move into Sophia's house for 2 weeks. Now, Sophia is the most amazing caregiver. And in addition to sweet, sweet caregiving, I had some of the most fun I have had in the last 5 years. We laughed, we giggled, we told stories, we worked on dreams every day, we meditated together twice a day. At 10 o'clock one night, we piled in a car and went to the Cold Stone Creamery and we ate ice cream, which nobody needs ice cream at 10 at night. But in the listening, I was directed to Sophia and it was a joyful, it wasn't the way I had it planned for my suffering, but it was a wonderful, delightful, delicious, happy, joyful outcome. And in the days of at Sophia's house, my husband's back got better. He came every day, he visited, he brought food, he wasn't left out. My other relative got better, my knee got better. In all this quiet time, there's a lot of quiet time in the healing from knee recovery. In the middle of the night, I woke up and I was still processing how I felt that my family wasn't able to be there for me. And deeply in prayer, and I don't mean superficial prayer, I mean way, way, way into the meditation, I saw written across the wall in Sophia's guest bedroom the words, and I heard a loving voice say, "You belong to me." And I felt God's love in that silence wash all over me. And I felt God saying, we all think that we belong to our families, that it's our family's responsibility to take care of us, which of course it certainly is to a certain degree. But what God was saying is, you belong to me and I have plans for how you're going to be cared for. And it's not necessarily the plans that you initially created for yourself and that you were mad when your plans didn't happen and you whined and felt sorry for yourself. I had a plan for you that was better than what you could create. And it is only in the silence that I could hear God saying, you belong to me. That is what I believe that every one of you all that are on this call have already heard or will hear or will continue to hear in your deepest silence when you are suffering. I believe that the bottom line message that we hear in that silence is that we hear God saying, you belong to me. I have a plan for you. I am already ahead of you, walking ahead of you into the areas of your suffering. I'm already there. I already have people lined up for you. I have care lined up for you. I am there. You belong to me. So to review, suffering coupled with anxiety intensifies the suffering. And breath work and meditation and silence calm anxiety. Silence helps us to be present in the moment and to accept what is instead of to fight it. And silence quietens us to listen for guidance of God's will for us and guidance to ask God in the quiet, is there some action that God needs us to take on behalf of the situation where there is the suffering? So I'd like to stop for a minute and hear any comments or questions, and then I'm going to read a quote from the mother, Sri Aurobindo's partner, and then we're going to do some meditation together. So just what comes to your mind in all this?
Susan, it's Annabelle.
Hi, Annabelle.
And hi, good morning. I want to, I try to hold back, but you have just spoken so beautifully about what I'm experiencing now. And maybe some don't know on this, that my son is not doing well with his substance abuse and addiction issues. And I have my curriculum. God's plan was not my plan. My plan was different. And my son has a journey that is not my journey. And parents always want the best for their kids, and they don't want their kids to suffer. Well, that may not be God's plan for Will. And he's a sensitive soul and a sweet soul underneath all of the stuff that happens. But as you know, I've had to separate myself from him and let him do this journey. And you were talking about God is here for me. Well, God is here for Will too.
Yes.
And I don't need to get myself all stirred up and anxious and worried. And so letting go of that has been a real eye-opener to me. Accepting the reality of his journey is not my journey. And in fact, his journey, as some of you know, if you're in Al-Anon or anything, that it is a family issue. And I have to take care of myself too. And unfortunately, I can't watch him suffer. I'm incapable of doing that because it will take me down. And so that sounds horrible. Why can't a mother be there? But I have had to come to accept the reality of me and what I need to do to take care of me. And silence and meditation have been critical in this part of my journey. I feel Henry took him to get his anti-opiate medication yesterday. And Henry, my husband, he basically said, Will's not doing too badly. He looks thin, yes, and all of that. But he was rational and da-da-da-da-da. And he says, Annabelle, he's going to walk a different road than you walked. So it's time for you to just, let him do his journey. Each of us has a journey and our suffering is different. Well, I'm such an empath that watching him suffer is just more than I can handle. So I've had to take what was a very difficult step. But it was all the meditation and the silence that has brought me to actually a place of great peace, knowing just what you said. God is with him. God has a plan for him. It's not my plan. And God has a plan for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. Thank you so much. the suffering that is there when we walk this with a child is just hard to even describe. Thank you so much. And I know how much the silence has helped and is helping you through it. And you've done a good job of teaching our group in your sharing about how the silence is helping you navigate it. Other thoughts or comments, or if anybody wants to respond to Annabelle, that's fine too. But if you also have a comment of your own, would be good to hear it. We need all the help from each other we can get on the suffering journey.
Susan, Annabelle, Dana, this is being recorded, right?
Yes.
If there's any way, I have a niece who's going through this with her son. And Annabelle, I would more than anything wish that she had been here to hear you this morning. Thank you so much.
It will be, it's recorded. It will be available soon for you all to share. It'll get posted both on the Interfaith Center as well as the House of Prayer websites.
Thank you so much. I will do that, and it will matter. Thank you.
So what did the talk about suffering or Annabelle's sharing, what's coming up for you inside? For anybody?
For me, there's the intellectual side that's going on just with the listening. And I hear that silence is golden. And as I sit with that phrase, I'm just seeing how the holy can move our intellect and the knowing he loves us to the being immersed in that love, like in that beautiful example that you shared of, you are mine, I am here, you are loved, that message. But without the silence, it's very difficult for a lot of us to move from that head into that place of just being immersed in God's love.
Mm-hmm.
It adds a little something more to me with the silence is golden. It's kind of rose up in the line. Not that it wasn't high, but
That's so beautifully said, because without the silence, we're in our own story.
Mhm.
And my story was, I'm hurting, my family let me down, I ran away, ha ha, I'm at Sophia's having fun. That's a stupid story. The real story is reality wasn't what I thought it was going to be. The divine opened a door that was really joyful, and that I was shown God's love for me. But when we're rattling around in our story,
Mhm.
which is all we have to rattle around in until we get quiet,
Mhm.
there's not another story until we go into the silence and we're lifted to a different level of consciousness.
Mhm.
So I love how you describe the silence as golden. So let's just sit and see what else is coming up for different people.
Susan, I think you turned off your video somehow.
I think you're right, Stephanie. Now it's back on. So let's see what else is coming up for people.
For me, I think about the different times of suffering in my life, whether it was with children or a spouse or even my own health issues, that the phrase radical acceptance makes all the difference. I even hearing that phrase, I feel like I'm breathing deeper. I can big exhale just with radical acceptance. And I also think that there's a way in which the radical acceptance and the silence are reciprocal. It's like when I breathe deeper with that radical acceptance, then I can be more silent and hear more and be more open. And then I can accept even more.
Mhm. I love that. Say a little bit more about how they're reciprocal, because that really feels true.
Well, and I don't know which comes first. Probably there's got to be some silence to invite the radical acceptance. But when I get to that place of accepting what is, and I breathe deeper, then I'm taken to a more silent place. And that in that silence, I can understand the suffering a little more. I can understand the need for acceptance more. And then that sort of triggers more acceptance for me and deeper breathing and then more silence.
It really feels true. And thank you for putting the light on that relationship, that as the body gets quieter, the mind can find more acceptance. The body gets quieter, the mind can quieten down, the thoughts can get less scary, the anxiety goes down. It's a helpful cycle instead of spinning out of control in the other direction. Thank you, Judy.
Sure.
So other thoughts or responses that are coming up from people?
I'll chime in here as a new person. I hope you don't mind.
I'm so happy about it.
As you mentioned this morning about the childhood dreams and childhood wound, and this idea of acceptance and silence, and for me, it conjures up an image of almost looking at yourself as a child from outside of yourself. And when I do that, it initiates a form of compassion for myself.
Mhm.
And that word compassion is what kind of bubbled up just now.
Mhm. It's so beautifully said, Dylan, because I used to think when I was young that my vulnerable child would go away when I got older. And I thought that if I had enough psychotherapy and enough spiritual growth, that my vulnerable child would go away. And the more I learned that we need that vulnerable child. It's the vulnerable child. Stephanie, can you spotlight me? Okay, let's don't worry about it. You can hear me. It doesn't matter.
You are spotlighted.
Okay. Well, anyway, whatever. I'll just keep going. I learned that the vulnerable child sits next to the soul child. And that if my vulnerable child feels safe with somebody, then I'm going to let them connect to my soul. If my vulnerable child does not feel safe with somebody, they are not going to have access to my soul ever. So the vulnerable child doesn't go away. We need the vulnerable child there. And as we grow, we develop the ability to do just what you said, which is we develop the ability to stand back as our healthy adult and view our child and take care of the child, have compassion for the child, protect the child, decide who the child gets to be around, what its needs are. So it's a beautiful thing that you've just described, and the child already has suffered, because all children suffer somewhere. And then the child has dreams, and then the dreams get broken, and then the adult comes in to protect and love and nurture that child. And silence helps that along. So thank you so much for contributing, and thank you for being a new person with us. And we hope you'll stick with us as we walk this mystery of silence together. Other thoughts or other reflections? I'm going to read a quote from the mother, Sri Aurobindo's spiritual partner, who taught in an ashram in Pondicherry, India. Even if things are not as they ought to be, worry does not help to make them better. A quiet confidence is the real source of strength. She continues, acceptance of a situation of suffering does not mean you accept it and submit to it with no action. You accept the facts of what exist, then in silence, and only in silence, you seek guidance about how to respond. So in summary, silence helps us to come to radical acceptance of the facts of the situation of suffering, and to accept our feelings about the suffering. Silence helps us lower our anxiety and quietens us to listen for God's will about whether or not there is an action that we are to take. Now we're going to have about 20 minutes of silence together. And we're going to do something that a little bit differently. We're going to have about 10 minutes of silence, and I'm not going to teach a new technique this time. So take a technique that you already have and use the first 10 minutes to quieten your mind and go into some situation where there is some suffering, either in your own life or in the world, and quieten your mind with the goal of just the radical acceptance of the facts of that situation. We're going to do that for about 10 minutes. And you know that your mind is going to wander, like, why would it be that way? That doesn't make any sense. Why would God make a world that way? I don't want it to be that way. I wish it weren't that way. And then you just go back to your meditation process. And I guess since I know that we have a couple of new people here, I'm not going to do a long teaching about a meditation technique. I'm assuming you might have one, but if you don't, just a quick process is find a word that is a quietening sacred word for you. It could be peace or calm or God's love. And if your mind wanders to why is the suffering and I wish it weren't there, you go back to your sacred word and back to your sacred word and back to your sacred word. So our first 10 minutes is just simply going to be practicing keeping our breath going, keeping our bodies relaxed by returning to the focal point in your particular meditation practice. Then at the end of that 10 minutes, I'm going to ring a bell and I'm going to ask you to direct that peace and that love into the situation. We're going to actually pray for the situation, but don't worry about that for right now. I'll give you some instructions on that later. So I'm going to ring a bell. We're going to sit in silence and do your own meditation process. And every time your mind gets distracted, we have to accept that we don't understand everything about why suffering is there. But we know that us being calm in the middle of it is our best opportunity to navigate it for ourselves and for others. So I'll ring the bell now and again in 10 minutes. And your job is to do your meditation while being aware of a situation of suffering. Now we're going to gradually shift our meditation from silencing our own mind to taking our quietened energy and to move it toward another person or a situation, or, as one of you has said, to our own inner child. So you're going to visualize a situation in front of you. It might be your own inner child. It might be a person you know. It might be a situation in the world. And you're going to do a form of silent prayer on behalf of that. And one way to do that is to think of extending your energy by moving your breath down into your heart and moving energy from your breath and your heart out to that situation, and moving the energy out and extending the energy and extending the energy. It's the energy of unconditional love. It's the energy of blessing. When we fertilize a plant, we don't say to the plant, take this nitrogen and send it over to this leaf because I know how you need to use the fertilizer. When we fertilize a plant, we extend that growth chemical or organic substance to the plant, and we trust that the plant and the universe will know what to do with that fertilizer. When you pray into a situation, just extend the energy of love and extend that energy into the situation. So we're going to do that together for a few minutes. And if you're not muted, please go ahead and mute yourself now. So I'm going to ring the bell, and we're going to sit and move our silence and our love toward a situation. Thank you for being with us this morning. We're grateful to have been able to gather. If you missed the announcement in the beginning, we will be continuing these once a month through the end of May. And the Reverend Stephanie Fox will give you notice of that. She'll also send out an evaluation form. Thank you for being here. May the silence help you accept the facts of any situation of suffering. May the silence help lower your fear about the suffering. May the silence help you accept every single feeling that you have about suffering. May the silence direct you to the people that God has already placed around you that are waiting to extend their hand to you to walk through the suffering. May the silence help you listen to the divine, to listen and seek guidance about, is there any action for you to take, or are you simply to be a presence of prayer? And may the silence help you have a calm center so that you may sit quietly and extend your love through extending the energy of prayer to the situation or the person or to yourself. Eternal Father, Divine Mother, beloved friend, Holy One, may our meditations be deep and filled with your Spirit, and may our daily lives reflect this quiet time with you. Amen. Bye-bye.